This is Making Waves, where we showcase student audio reporting from Troy University's Hall School of Journalism and Troy Public Radio. I'm your host, Jamison Spees. And for our very first episode, I sat down with Emily Mosier, a recent Troy graduate. During her time here at Troy, Mosier worked as a producer for Troy Public Radio, served as the editor-in-chief of the Troy University's Tropolitan newspaper, and as a reporter for TROJANVision News. This fall, she's headed to the University of Arizona to study investigative journalism at the Cronkite School of Journalism. She has received numerous awards for her reporting, filed multiple stories for the NPR hourly newscast, and reported a series of investigative articles for the Tropolitan. With so many options to pick from, I was curious to know which story was her favorite. Naturally, given her print background, it was for the newspaper, and it did make waves.
Hands down, the story series that I am the most proud of at my time at Troy is the investigative series that I did on Malone Hall. Malone Hall is the fine arts and performing arts building here on campus, and they had all kinds of safety and health hazards, concerns inside of the building. And I did a series of 3 articles. The result of my reporting with the Malone Hall series led to the university moving all of the students out of the building and dedicating over $1.5 million to addressing the concerns. It was definitely the series that I worked the hardest on, that took the most effort, the most time, was the most stressful, but it was also the one that had the biggest impact, where I had art students and faculty thanking me for doing that reporting. And I would say I learned quite a lot in that process. That was my first time trying to get public records, for example. It got thousands of shares on social media. I mean, it was something people were talking about for sure.
Every year, thousands of people gather in Selma, Alabama, to commemorate a landmark moment in the struggle for civil rights. During her time at Troy, Mosier covered the marches twice for NPR News.
Because of Troy Public Radio's affiliation with NPR, I was able to get a White House press pool badge to be in the press pool when President Biden was in Selma to commemorate Bloody Sunday. And that was just an incredible experience to get patted down by Secret Service and report on something that really, really meant something to the people who were there. The people who come to recreate those marches, it really means something to them. And you get to talk to people from all over the world, people who are descendants of MLK Jr. I remember walking across that bridge my sophomore year of Troy and just knowing that this is what I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing, that journalism is where I wanted to be. My senior year, I went back again, and this time I got to report for National Public Radio.
And now we're going to play that news spot that Mosier did for NPR. This came out in March of 2025.
Thousands of people rallied in Selma, Alabama this weekend for the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. On that day, peaceful protesters marched for the right to vote and were beaten by state troopers. Troy Public Radio's Emily Mosier reports that yesterday, activists reenacted the peaceful march.
What do we want? Voting rights! When do we want them? Now!
On that first Bloody Sunday in 1965, black protesters marched for the right to vote. 6 decades later, participants are continuing the tradition. Here's Rose Smith from Atlanta.
My ancestors were here before me. They paved the way for me to be here. And I hear them crying from the grave. You belong here.
This weekend, marchers criticized President Donald Trump's recent ban on DEI programs. So did Representative Shamari Figures.
We got to stick together, because say whatever you want to about the Republicans and Donald Trump, you cannot call them not unified.
The day concluded with a benefit concert for the National Voting Rights Museum. For NPR News, I'm Emily Mosier in Selma, Alabama.
Then, during spring break of her senior year, Troy was hit by a devastating tornado that caused extensive damage in the city and surrounding area. Early the next morning, Mosier was on the scene, taking pictures and interviewing victims of the tragedy. So can you start by talking a little bit about the tornado and then your role in covering that?
So this was my final spring break at Troy. It was a couple of days before I left for my spring break trip, And essentially, a bunch of tornadoes went through the South. There were several that were close to us, including Troy. And so the damage in Troy was there was like a cluster of businesses, and then there was a neighborhood. So I went into the neighborhood, and it was pretty devastating to see. I mean, just trees upon trees piled on the side of the road. Fortunately, I knew somebody who lived in that neighborhood, so I was able to like park my car in their driveway and just walk around. I knew I was going to do the story for the Tropolitan newspaper, so a good friend of mine, we got in our car and we drove all around town like first thing in the morning and just took photographs. I was able to photograph everything before any like repairs started to be done. We parked our car, got out on the side of the road, we're taking pictures. It was really something to see, like going to the businesses the next day and seeing like windows blown out, and there was like metal railings from the side of the road that were like wrapped around trees. I mean, it was a pretty horrible thing to see. One of my favorite parts about covering these stories was definitely getting to cover the community outreach that happened afterwards. I have very rarely seen communities come together so fast. After something like this happens, there was a student who was organizing drives and carried like cars full of materials to people who were impacted in like surrounding cities outside of Troy. And the woman I interviewed whose dad lost everything, people like saw them on the side of the road, stopped and like gave them money, gave them supplies, gave them food. There was very much a sad element to this, but also a very heartwarming element as well. It was my first time covering a natural disaster, so I definitely learned a lot. You know, it was one of my first times doing a story where I was on the physical ground in the field immediately after something had happened, having to navigate, interviewing people who were going through, one of the worst days of their lives.
After spending hours in the studio preparing this story, here's the spot that Emily sent to NPR.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Strong storms in the central and southeastern U.S. are blamed for at least 39 deaths over the weekend. People were killed in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Alabama. From Troy Public Radio, Emily Mosier reports on what people in southern Alabama experienced.
People in Troy, Alabama, who once considered themselves living in the woods, say that has changed after a tornado toppled hundreds of trees around their homes. Don Wambles with the Alabama Disaster Relief Association has rushed to many scenes of destruction to provide aid. But he breaks down when talking about the tornado in his own neighborhood.
You see the damage, the destruction to people's lives, and the fact that they're just absolutely overwhelmed by the damage.
Alabama Governor Kay Ivey has expressed condolences to those across the state who have experienced property damage and loss of life.
What is the purpose of reporting on natural disasters?
Journalism at its core is a public service. And when it comes to natural disasters, people need to know what's going on, because if the community knows that it's happened, then the community can step in and help even further.
Recently, she went to the 2025 Southeastern Journalism Conference in Mississippi, where she signed up for the radio reporting on-site competition. She was given several hours to research, interview, write, and produce a full story. It was her first time competing, and she won.
It was a really interesting prompt. Basically, Mississippi State had this large document of changes that they were hoping to implement on campus in the next however many years it was. Basically, you were supposed to just pick a place that was going to be changed in the next few years and do your best to capture the story or the livelihood or the essence of that place. And so I did mine on the cafeteria at Mississippi State. So one of the interviews I did was a girl who happened to be a tour guide at Mississippi State, and she was able to tell me how the dining cafeteria is a place that brings people together of different cultures. She really talked about the history from World War II and how they have all of the the flags of every country that students who go to that university are from hanging there. And then my other interview was from a professor who actually had a lot of severe food allergies. And he was able to talk about how the dining hall is less about the food and more about bringing people together, because even him, as somebody who couldn't always eat the food there, like really, really loved that place.
And of all the stories Mosier reported on for the radio, one in particular was close to her heart. The story of a statue lovingly nicknamed Helen of Troy.
That story, that one was near and dear to my heart because I think I mentioned before that I was a double major and I also majored in English. Helen is what we have nicknamed a nameless statue that stands in front of the English building. She's like an icon. She is a landmark. She is a symbol to the English major. She means a lot to us. And I just kind of realized one day that there's only 2 female statues on campus, and they're pretty much the only statues on campus that don't have names. And it was also just to like inspire a conversation about what does equity mean? Why aren't there named female statues on campus?
And here is Helen of Troy.
You're listening to Troy Public Radio. I'm Kyle Gassett. On Troy University's main campus, there's a statue of a maiden on top of a fountain with water that flows, some of the time. Helen, as she's affectionately known, is one of only 2 statues of women on campus. And despite being the smallest, she has a big job, as producer Emily Mosier reports.
Moss grows in the crevices of Helen's hair, and pieces of her face are chipped away. At 3 feet tall, she stands elegantly in the memorial garden in front of Smith Hall, the English building. She holds a cup and a pitcher from which water flows.
And she's kind of like an unofficial greeting committee almost when you walk into Smith Hall.
Junior Sarah Robbins, like me, is an English major.
Some people refer to her as Helen because she doesn't actually have a name plaque on her. So we figured because we're in Troy, she should be of Troy.
Helen was called into service sometime after another statue toppled over. No one can remember the year. We do know she was purchased with funds given in memory of First Lady Janice Hawkins' mother, who passed away in 2003. Dance professor and rose connoisseur Deborah Hicks used to work in the English department. She proposed the idea of creating the Rose Garden Helen now watches over. Through the years, Hicks's students have gotten to know Helen and the Rose Garden through assigned writing prompts.
And those were the most beautiful writing samples I have ever gotten. It's just the mystery of myth that they absorbed and they just poured out, and it was incredible.
The percentage of female to male statues on campus is about 1/5. The numbers are better for humans when you learn that 64% of students at Troy are female. So, with a significant number of women on campus, why aren't there more female statues? And why do neither of the ones that are here have names? When I started asking this question, I found out several students weren't aware the campus had any female statues at all. Business major Mackenzie Ensley had never really thought about it, but she had some feelings.
I don't like it, but I guess it makes sense with because all the buildings are named after men as well and their wives. I think it would be nice for more notable female figures to have statues. I think there's some really deserving women who should be recognized by the school.
The dean of the College of Communication and Fine Arts, Michael Thrasher, says representation is found in other places on campus, such as half of the CCFA's departments being led by women.
Of the statues on campus don't necessarily represent any one particular person. Maybe it's just an idea. For example, we have a replica of the Rodin statue, The Thinker, located on campus here. Not a person in particular, but just the idea of philosophy, thought, contemplation.
Thrasher says he appreciates the question about representation being asked.
I think anytime we can engage diverse perspectives, new points of view that maybe differ from our own or that challenge our preconceived thinking, that's a good thing.
Hicks just wants to see some change.
There's no malicious intent. It's almost worse. It's like it's not a thought. So if there were more female statues on campus, I think that gives the female the opportunity to stand tall and feel counted.
The garden has a plaque with lyrics from the Christian hymn, "I Come to the Garden Alone," an ironic reference for Helen, a statue who stands alone in so many ways. For Troy Public Radio, I'm Emily Mosier.
And before we finish this first episode about audio journalists making waves, Mosier has a few pieces of splashy advice for future journalism students.
My number one advice, specifically to student journalists, is get involved. All of the opportunities that I had while I was talking about freelancing with NPR or being able to do these investigative series came about because I was so involved in all of these different, journalism extracurriculars that people thought of me when these opportunities came about. I worked for the paper for 4 years. I was constantly around the radio station. I even helped with TrojanVision one summer and have done stuff with them and took a production class with them. So get as involved as you can and don't be afraid to pitch your own stories. What I found at Troy is that if you were willing to put in the work and to show up, you really were able to do as much as you wanted to. So get involved. Don't be afraid to be bold or to step on toes at times. Troy specifically has, I just love the journalism program here. I consider several of these professors to be mentors of mine. I guess that's another piece of advice, get to know your professors. The Troy faculty here are just amazing, and they have some really amazing experiences between them, and they really are here to help you. There truly are so many opportunities here.
Great. Well, Emily Mosier, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
This has been Making Waves. Be sure to tell other people about this podcast and leave us a review. It helps other people to find the show. Special thanks to our director, Kyle Gassett, and our executive producer, Joey Hudson. Making Waves is a collaboration between the Hall School of Journalism and Troy Public Radio. I'm your host, Jamison Spees, inviting you to join us again for the next big splash on Making Waves.